Testing. 1, 2. 1, 2. Hallelujah. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, I can't stand them technology demons. Amen. I'll tell you, ironically, you can be seated if you can. I'm telling you, Abba's about to reveal some things to us in this Torah portion that I dare say we probably have never seen before. And it's good because this is the season that we're living in. And in spite of what you may be hearing going on around you, there are some things that's happening among his people that is juxtaposed to what's happening amongst those that call themselves his people. Are you hearing me? There's a line being drawn in the sand, and this, I believe, indeed is a prophetic word. I'm convinced with all my heart that this particular word this afternoon is going to bring some correction. It's going to bring some reproof. It is going to bring some instruction. But more important than any of those, and we need that, turn to your neighbor and tell them, I'm an undisciplined individual. I need discipline and correction. But what you also need to understand is that Abba has plans for you. And that you were created for this hour. You were created for this season. You could have been born in any other time in creation because the DNA that is resonating inside you was inside the body of our Creator. And when you were released into the earth, there was a gestational cycle that was attached to the day that you would be born into the earth and to the duration of time that you would be on this earth. And you have a purpose. I want to encourage you. Do not be discouraged. You're more than a conqueror. You're an overcomer. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And the next verse, very few people pay attention to. If you can understand that the greater one lives inside me and that he's greater than the one that's coming against me, then you can follow along the lines of the next verse. And it says, for as he was in this earth, so are you. And if we can begin to make that declaration, as the hordes of the enemy began to be assembled against the body of believers, and as it looks as if we're being surrounded on all sides, and as it looks as if the foxes have been released to bark against the vine, and the hounds have been set free to come against his people, this is the single most glorious time in creation for the body of Messiah to be identified as belonging to the Creator and be able to demonstrate what he has called you to do in your season. In your season, you should start expecting the supernatural. In fact, you should start expecting to see places so that you could plant the supernatural. And the supernatural is nothing short of his word. It goes beyond the confines of the flesh. That's why it's super, above the natural abilities. And if you will learn how to speak his word in the midst of your situation, you will not fall to prey to the false prophets and those that are speaking things contrary to the word of Yah. If there is a genuine prophet in the earth today, his message will always be the same as it was from Genesis forward, and it will be to return to Torah. Return to the Torah. If there is a gilded prophet in the earth today with his skinny jean self telling you that he is a prophet, and he's not telling you to keep the Shabbat and keep the holy convocations of Yahweh, those are set apart times that Abba's going to visit his people in the coming days and take you into places of privacy and seclusion and the confines of his word where you can be sheltered against what the enemy is about to unleash. If he's not prophesying those things and keeping those things, then he is a liar. And all liars shall have their part in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. And they are of their father, who was the original birther of the liar. Can you say amen? This Torah portion that we're going to look at this week, we've looked at it for a couple of decades, and I promise you, you're going to see some things in this parsha that you probably have not seen regarding Balak and Balaam. And it's in Numbers chapter 22, verse 2 through chapter 21, verse 9. And I will challenge you this afternoon. If you have limited yourself to simply what you can glean from the King James Bible, and in addition to the King James, any other derivative of there, whether it's the Living Bible, the New King James translation, or any of those other translations, and you have not purposely exposed yourself to the language of creation, the Hebrew language, so that you can understand what's written below the surface of the text, you're not going to see what we're sharing this afternoon. You're just simply not going to see it. The King James Version will never reveal what we're about to look at. There's some hidden truths regarding Balak and Balaam that we need to understand because it's pertinent to the season we're living in. The spirit behind those two individuals is alive and well, and the spirit behind those two individuals, not only do they occupy the principal platforms and pulpits in most of the believing community's congregations, but they also sit amongst the congregation. And if you cannot recognize them, then I'm telling you, there's some things that's headed your direction that is going to sweep you off your foundation. Say amen. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to look into the depths of the Hebrew language, and we're going to find out not only what was literally happening there with Balak and Balaam, but what was going along behind the scenes. How many of you have ever seen the movie The Wizard of Oz? How many of you know that what was behind the screen was not what was depicted in front of it? Amen? And so we're going to look behind the screen, and we're going to see who the real wizard is, and we're going to find out that the spiritual influence that motivated Balak and Balaam, again, is alive today, and we're going to see not only how it's affecting us currently, but how it's going to affect us in the days ahead, and it's going to open up some gateways. And you need to be careful, because that's exactly what happened that caused the demise of the house of Israel. They listened to the voice of Balak and Balaam. Okay? And so as we begin to kind of set the backdrop here, set the foundation, if you remember the way that the Parsha starts, Og and Sihon, who were kings of the Amorites, had just been defeated in battle by Moshe and the nation of Israel. And if you go back and look and study history just a little bit, you can find it in the Torah as well. You can find that Sihon, who was also known as the king of Bashan, had previously taken a specific piece of land between the Jabbok and the Arnon rivers, which belonged to Moab. Now, Moab's king at this particular time is Balak. And so Balak is looking at what transpired because there had been a battle, a war that took place. Sihon had come in and defeated Moab and taken part of this principal piece of property. And Balak was intensely afraid of Sihon and Og of Bashan, and yet they saw that Moshe had defeated both of them in battle. And so the natural thing is, if they've already previously defeated us and they've been defeated by someone greater than them, how can we stand in a physical conflict? And so he begins to think outside the box, and he begins to contrive a method so that he can set traps for the nation of Israel in a spiritual conflict. Can you see that? And so he's not really willing to do battle directly with Israel, and so he attempts spiritual warfare as an alternative. And to aid him in his propaganda and in his method of warfare against the house of Israel, he solicits the aid of this individual called Balaam. Now, if you go back and study what's transpiring here, most historians will say that there was actually about 400 miles between where Balak was and Balaam resided. And so you have to ask yourself, why would a king send messengers 400 miles to summons in what the King James calls a prophet? Now, it's interesting, because if you look at Balaam's name, his name is translated as destruction and confusion, and it actually comes from a root that means to swallow something up. And I'll tell you this, confusion will literally swallow you up. Confusion, as it swallows you up, will lead to destruction. And this is what Balak is doing. He summons this guy who is known, his name's earmarked. His character is one that has the ability to say certain things that will bring confusion and thus bring destruction to those that he's hired. Listen to me. He's hired to do this. And I am sharing this with you this afternoon. There are a lot of hirelings in the believing community that have been hired. And you need to go back. If they've been hired, who hired them? And their method of operation is to bring confusion and destruction, and it's causing the body of Messiah to be literally swallowed up by this. Can you say amen? Now, if you study the scriptures, most scholars will tell you that Balaam does not appear anywhere in the Torah until right here in Numbers chapter 22, where it begins this portion. But if you go back, if you want to really do some digging, and you need to learn how to do this. You need to learn how to extricate the truth, and it means that you're going to have to get up off your lackadaisical backside and begin to work hard at finding what's below the surface. Is that easy to understand? Now, if you go back and read in Numbers chapter 21, verse 7, this is what's said. Wherefore, they that speak in Proverbs say, Proverbs, prophecy, come unto Heshbon, let the city of Sihon be built and prepared. Well, if you read that, it doesn't really give you an idea of who's making those prophecy, of who's saying those proverbs. But if you go back and read the preceding verses and those that follow Numbers 21, verse 27, it's actually giving you the prophecy wherein Sihon would later fulfill, and he takes the land of Moab. But the King James doesn't tell us who that is. However, if you look at one of what we call the extra-biblical books called the book of Jasher, in Jasher chapter 84 and verse 19 and verse 22, it confirms the identity of the individual who made that prophetic declaration. And look at it with me. Jasher chapter 84, verse 19. Therefore, the parable speakers, Beor, who is the father of Balaam, and by the way, if you look at the word Beor, it can actually also be translated to the root of a word that means destruction. Father of Balaam brought destruction. It was a generational curse that was not only natured and wombed inside Beor, but he planted the seed in his son, and his son Balaam continued to propagate confusion and destruction. And he did it, that, in my opinion, he's worse than anybody else because he did it for a price. Are you hearing me? We don't read that in the King James English, but throughout the scripture there's a prohibition against the reward of divination. Anybody that would take the reward of divination, in other words, anybody that would be involved in witchcraft and necromancy and anything that was sort of related to that, and use that as a means to curse Yahweh's people, that individual was underneath the curse. Well, this is what Balaam's doing. Balak sends a reward with him, with his emissaries, to Balaam in the hopes that he can bring Balaam, who is a prophet of divination. He is not a true prophet of Yahweh. I can prove it conclusively from the scripture, and you'll say, I don't understand. Yahweh spoke to him through him. I'm going to show you another individual or another entity that Yahweh speaks through in this same Torah portion. And if Balaam was a holy prophet, then this other entity is also a holy prophet. And I'll submit to you that that individual that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes is also speaking from a lot of today's platforms and pulpits. Say amen. Come unto Heshbon. And it was, well, let me back up. Therefore the parable speakers, Beor and Balaam, his son, uttered these words, saying, come unto Heshbon, the city of Sihon, we built and established. And again, it tells us that Sihon gave numerous presents of silver and gold to Beor and Balaam. Now, let me share this with you. If you read this, it leads you to believe that Balaam and his father Beor and Og and Sihon were very close confederates and had a very tight relationship. How can I be in a relationship? How can I be a cohort, if you will, of Belial and call myself a son of Yahweh? How can I be an idolater and call myself a son of Yahweh? How can I commingle the things of the Torah with the things of the world and call myself a son of Yahweh? So you have to ask this. You can't just take what you read in the text here and say, oh my God, he evidently was a true prophet simply because his words came true. Are you hearing me? This is important. So it's the natural thing for Balak, the king of Moab, to know of Balaam's prophetic abilities and the previous declarations that he had made against his own people. And thus he seeks to hire him to prophesy and to curse Israel. And again, on the surface here, it kind of gives us a conundrum. How can Balak expect his tactics, which he's not going to use physical warfare, he's going to invoke spiritual warfare. So how can Balak expect his tactics of spiritual warfare to work against Israel when it's very clear in the Torah that both Og and Sihon were giant men, offspring of the Nephilim, or the fallen ones, and women. In other words, they were Nephilim, and yet they were soundly defeated. So it seems to me like it's almost a contradiction in terms. In other words, Balaam is trying to invoke spiritual warfare, but it's clear Og and Sihon used spiritual warfare, the spiritual power that the enemy would lend to them, and yet they were defeated by Israel. And so why would Balak presume that what did not work against Israel with Og and Sihon would now work by using Balaam to curse him? Do you understand that? I think that Balak knew something about Israel that most of us are not aware of. I think that he knew that there were some innate weaknesses inside the house of Israel, and more than likely the enemy also gave him some insight regarding some gateways, some doorways into the nation of Israel, and he knew, if I can get in through those doorways, I can compromise you. Are you hearing me? Let me read to you what Amos chapter 2 verse 9 says. This is Yahweh speaking. Og and Sihon were called Amorites. They were part of one of the 7 nations, Canaanite nations, that were slated for annihilation by the children of Israel as they went into the land of Canaan. If you don't understand why they were marked for destruction, go back and read the book, The Serpent Seed There Among Us. I know that's a shameless plug, but I'm telling you, we don't have time to really get into a lot of this. But Yahweh does not arbitrarily destroy nations and children and cattle without a reason. And the only reason that you can find him doing so is if their DNA had been compromised with the seed of the serpent. So that's why these Amorite kings had been slated for destructions. Are you with me? Now, Amos 2:9 says, this is Yahweh speaking, yet destroyed I the Amorite before them. Before who? Before Israel. He's talking now about Og and Sihon. And now Yahweh is going to describe the physical stature of these giants. He said their height was like the height of the cedars. Go back and read what is said regarding the cedars and the oaks of Bashan. These were not only tall and massive, but they indicated strength and virility. He said that their height was like the height of cedars, and that he was as strong as the oaks. Listen to this. Yahweh says something here, and if you read it in just the English language, you'll miss it. He said, I destroyed his fruit from above. Og and Sihon were the fruit above. They were the fruit of the natural realm. Yahweh said, I had Moshe destroy them. And then he makes a declaration. This is in hindsight looking back. He says, I also destroyed his roots from beneath. Now I have to go back and understand, why is there a distinguishing mark being put between the fruit above and the roots beneath? If you don't understand that, then you'll never understand what Daniel prophesies when he interprets the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had of the image in the days ahead that had, in the last day, our day, would form a nation comprised of 10 toes who are commingled with iron and miry clay. The iron represents the roots beneath, while the miry clay represents the fruit above in the natural realm. Do you see that? And it's important for us because these gates are being opened again in the days ahead of us like has never been seen. Never been seen like what we're going to witness in the days in front of us. And I'm going to show you the vehicle that's used. I'm going to show you the gateway. I'm going to show you how those gateways can get open. We'll by no means touch every one of them, but you'll get the gist of it, and hopefully you'll begin to prepare yourself. Og and Sihon, both Amorites, were the physical fruit represented above in their natural bodies, the kingdom that they represented in the natural realm. and it presented a challenge to Moshe and Israel. But it's evident that Moshe and Israel, and you can see it, King David killed a giant. Remember Goliath? He destroyed the giant. He destroyed the fruit above. But something regarding this entity called the giant still had roots beneath that had to be dealt with. Can you see that? And so Moshe and the children of Israel destroyed Og and Sihon and cut them off naturally, but there still remain roots beneath, and those roots were the fallen angelic and demonic spirits who I believe from the inception of creation forward lent their influence in every situation where the word of Yahweh was being opposed, and in this particular Torah portion, Balak and Balaam. Now, how did they do that? I'm convinced that Yahweh has set a precedent in motion. And every time Yahweh sets a precedent in motion, the enemy, in order for him to operate legally, he has to counterfeit the same measure and get permission from those that are controlling the gateways to access that gateway the same way. Yahweh will never force himself on you. Although he has the power, he could shake you like a rag doll and force you to do this, but because he's locked himself into the free will of an individual, he will not subvert your own personal authority. Yahweh has to have your permission, but so does the enemy. Are you hearing me? So does the enemy. And so these entities lent their influence to those that became their puppets in the earth, like Balak and Balaam. And they were able to access certain dimensional gateways that became available to them because Balak and Balaam, and they're just two, there's isolated incidents throughout Scripture where men were used. Are you following me? And so if men will give their permission, the enemy then will access the doorway. And if you don't know where the doorway was open, it could have been opened several generations prior to you. And even though you are ignorant of it and don't understand it, it will still be grandfathered down to you until such time as you seek Yahweh and find out where that, whatever is causing you to go through what you're going through, where it originated. Then you have to first repent yourself, because by acquiescence, you may not have directly given him permission and invited him in, but because we didn't actively and aggressively say no, by acquiescence, we've allowed him to come in and use us. So now you have to go back and find out where that door was open and go back and shut that door and learn how to break those generational curses. Is that making sense to you? These fallen entities not only manifested their powers at that particular time, but they will continue to do so until the time of the end. That's powerful. Moshe and Israel indeed cut off the fruit from above. In other words, they cut off the physical bodies of Og and Sihon, who was king of Bashan. But the roots from beneath were left and had to be dealt with. And I can show you later on where they were dealt with. I can actually show you that they were dealt with when the children of Israel were about to enter into the promised land, and when the priest stepped with the ark into the Jordan River, the Jordan, the one that flows from above. The waters below were cut off from the waters above. It's talking about seminal seed. It's talking about cutting off the roots from beneath. As they stepped into that river, Yahweh causes them to step into the dimensional portal, and that's when the roots beneath were cut off, and then Joshua and his cohorts, the children of Israel, had to go in and physically remove the seed. Are you hearing me? Sometimes you deal with something in the natural, and it seems as if you've been effective. If you haven't dealt with it in the spirit realm, your battle is not finished. Sometimes you deal with a spiritual battle, and you think that you've finished it. But if you don't deal with the natural fruit of that thing that's manifested itself in front of you, guess what? You still left the doorway open. And this may seem like rudimentary stuff and basic stuff, but I'm telling you, Abba's trying to get this into our spirit man today, because gateways and portals are being opened in the natural realm at an alarming rate. It's mind-staggering. Og and Sihon were Nephilim. They comprised a physical body that was an entity that was part fallen one and part man. And so if you killed a physical body, it still left a disembodied spirit that needed a vessel. Are you hearing me? That spirit worked through the vessel of Og and Sihon, just like it did Goliath. But once that body is killed, if you don't deal with the roots beneath, listen to me, then that disembodied spirit, a spirit without a body, has to find a body as a mechanism, as a vehicle to follow through, to work through in the earth. The enemy can't do anything in the earth without working through a human, just like Yahweh doesn't. That's the way he set the precedent. What gateways? What portal? Not only can a gateway be a physical body, it can also be the mind. In fact, the mind is the womb where you begin to inculcate, where you begin to incubate, where you begin to meditate on the seed that's being presented to you. Oh, I just never will believe that an angel can have any kind of a sexual relationship with a man or a human. It's happened throughout history. And again, go back and read the serpent seed there among us. And there are documented evidence even today. Are you listening to me? This is important. Your mind, your body, your spirit man, words that are spoken can become a conveyor belt leading to a doorway or a threshold. That's why you need to be careful what you hear. I appreciate Shepherd John earlier. The most important thing that was ever said in the Torah was Shema. Hear. And Shema means more than just hear. There's a lot of folks in the church that hear but do nothing with it and don't understand it. Shema means to hear, to understand, and be obedient, to put it into practice. Yeshua said, "Let he that hath an ear to hear, hear what the Ruach is saying." There are other things in addition to words that are spoken. There are tangible objects. Listen to me. The enemy can work through tangible objects. Am I saying that, for instance, that he could possess this computer? No, the computer doesn't have a mind of his own, but this computer can become a terminal, if you will, a gateway, a conveyor belt leading it into the gateway that it can access. Tangible objects such as electronic devices, I just don't believe that. I don't believe that. And we don't want to accept it because everyone probably sitting in here today has got an electronic device in our pockets or our purses, in our hands most of the time. And I am here to tell you that those devices, if we're not careful, the enemy will use that as an access way, a doorway to produce certain things, to condition you certain ways, to begin to speak certain things into you by virtue of what you listen to and what you look at, to begin to condition you to accept the things that he's bringing in the earth today. How many of you have ever heard of Alexa? I'm not really sure who puts that out. Who's Alexa? Amazon? Amazon? Did you know that Alexa now is being conditioned to have the capability to speak to you with the voice of your dead loved ones? Now, stop for a second. What if one of my loved ones expired before these electronic devices became popular? How are they ever going to be able to record my dead loved one's voice? I'm telling you, it's because of familiar spirits that have been associated with family generationally, and it's those things that will lend their spiritual influence to these artificial intelligent devices, and people are going to hear that, and they're going to listen to it, and they're going to be moved by that. Games, videos, magical incantations. What? I'm not involved in magic. I don't care. Listen, you can argue with me until the cows come home. All of these electronic devices have magical incantations embedded in them, so much so that it has it. And they used to do that back when I was a kid going to the drive-in theater. They would subliminally produce messages on the screen to make you hungry. And as soon as there was in between the intermission, you would get up and you'd go buy popcorn, a drink, or a hamburger. Why? Because you were being subliminally programmed with these magical incantations, and they're doing it today. Every form of media today has the ability and uses it on a daily basis to speak into you. Physical territories. Listen to me, the enemy has for years camped out in certain places that have powers, spiritual powers. That's why you need to go back and do some research on ley lines and how those ley lines are parceled out across the whole world, and you'll find that at specific places things are happening. Stonehenge, what you find taking place over in Georgia with the guidestones, those things were built on specific ley lines. Why? Because they understood that there was a gateway here and power could be invoked in those particular places. This should be a gateway. We ought to be able to stand here and invoke the power of Yahweh, and we ought to be able to cause everything within a city block to fall on their knees and repent. There's a day coming shortly when we're going to see those things happen. Most of these things can't be seen with your natural eye. I hope that you guys will indulge me this afternoon. We've got a lot of territory to cover. What gateways are within your control? And I'm asking you, are you possessing the gates of your enemy? You were commanded to do so. You were commanded to possess if you're a seed of Abraham, and we flaunt that as if it's a magical incantation. You don't understand. I'm a seed of Abraham. Well, if you are, then you need to be possessing your gates. And you not only need to be possessing your gates, you need to be able to possess the gates of your enemy. So if you're in an area where the enemy has been working, you know that's a gateway. You need to go over there and say, oh, excuse me, stop. I serve you an eviction notice now, cease and desist, leave and don't come back. This place now belongs to the King, the magistrate of all creation, our Messiah Yeshua, and I am an emissary and ambassador in his stead. You will no longer operate here. That's what we need to start doing. We need to begin to exert the influence that is ours. I want you to, this word for possess the gate of your enemies. It comes from the Hebrew word yerash. Now, every Hebrew word, in my opinion, has either a blessing or a curse associated with it. And so this word for possess, yerash, actually indicates to inherit something or to be disinherited. If I'm controlling and possessing my gates and the gates of my enemy, guess what? I am accessing my inheritance. If the enemy is accessing any of the gates around me, I have just been disinherited of what rightfully belongs to me. How many of you, I'm just going to throw it out, how many of you currently are satisfied with your present financial situation? How many of you know that all hell is about to be vomited loose? Gas prices, food prices are going through the roof. There is a concerted effort as we speak to depopulate the earth and to make it extremely difficult for the masses to have access to anything that would sustain them. And if you're not satisfied with that, then you must have access to a different inheritance. Because if you can't access your inheritance, you're going to be in between the proverbial rock and hard place. And I've told my family would tell you for years, I believe we're about to go into a wilderness excursion. And I've told them we're going to eat manna and quail. We're the head, not the tail. We're blessed coming in. I don't care if the rest of the world is not. Abba's word says if I would walk up right before him, I would be blessed coming in and blessed going out. That I'm the head and not the tail. I'll be blessed in the city and in the field and in my basket and my storehouse. Abba's word says that. But if I can't even possess my own gate, much less the gate of the enemy around me, if I don't have the gumption to get up and find out if there is a dimensional portal on my piece of property or in my house, is there something going on in my house where someone has grandfathered a transport or a gateway? Maybe, like in Star Trek, something is being beamed down into my house. If I don't have the gumption to get up and pray and fast and praise and worship and seek Yahweh, then you need to be content with what you got. Hello. Yerash. to either inherit or be disinherited. Listen to this. The resh shin root of Yerash means to be permitted or empowered. So either I'm permitted or empowered, or I permit or empower the enemy. And it's interesting. I shared this with Rochelle earlier. Those same letters for Yod, Resh, Shin that give us Yerash, turn them around and form the word Shin, Yod, Resh. It's the word Sha'ir, and it means a word in Hebrew. It's a Hebrew word that means praise by singing. If you want to learn how to possess your gates, then what you need to start doing, praise is powerful, it's demonstrative, and praise and worship are two different animals. You need to grasp that. Praise gets this fleshly man under control and gets this fleshly man ready to step into a different dimension called worship. If you can't praise, you're never going to worship. And you begin to praise. Praise is the first step to receiving an inheritance. Praise is the first step to seeing the enemy exposed in your life. And I'm not talking about this fleshly kind of praise that you see in a lot of congregations today where we have all of the lights and we're no different than what you'd see in a something going in a disco club. I'm talking about the genuine kind of praise and worship that invokes the presence of Yahweh. If you continue to take those same letters, you can also form the word Yashar, which is the root of Jerusalem, and also Yashar El Israel, the root of that. Can you say, possess the gates? Excuse me. Man, I'm getting myself worked up. Is it getting warm in here, or is it just me? Can we discuss these gateways for a minute? Because I want to show you the word given to you. If you are seed of Abraham. Genesis 22:17 says, in blessing I will bless you. Again, this is where we just read something and look at it from the face value and don't take the time to dig this stuff out. In blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemy. How many of you can truthfully say you're possessing the gate of your enemy? Or most of us say, you know, he's really a good neighbor. And I know that he and the folks down the street are, you know, they've been having a few issues, but as long as he's not bothering me. Look at verse 16. And Yahweh said, by myself have I sworn, saith Yahweh, because, and then this is speaking to Abraham. I'm going to show you why Abraham is blessed and why Abraham's seed's going to be blessed. Yahweh said, because you have done this thing. Done what thing? Whatever it was that caused him to be blessed and his seed to be multiplied like the stars of the heaven. Don't you want to know what that was so that you can be blessed and multiplied? Because you have done this thing, what thing? You did not withhold your son, your only son, your only begotten son. Those words are powerful here. So what is it? What's so staggering? What is so powerful about him not withholding Isaac? And why was that so important? Yahweh, if you go back and look at it, it seems that Yahweh could have had anybody to take their son up and go through the motions of offering them as a sacrifice. Or does it? If you read this, it says that Abraham offered his only begotten. You gotta listen to the language here. Sarah was barren. Now, we can argue this until the cows come home, but it's very well possible that this could have been an immaculate conception. Did you hear what I just said? Sarah and Abraham, in their advanced age, were not able to have children. She was barren. But what does happen, regardless of what transpired to birth that son Isaac, if you understand ancient Near Eastern covenant language, when you and I enter into a covenant relationship, there was always a mutual exchange of position. And so if Abraham and Yahweh enter into a covenant, Abraham offers his son, and then what next transpires is it gives Yahweh an opportunity to offer his son. If Abraham had not been willing to offer Isaac, then the door would have been closed until somebody else was selected so that Yeshua could not access the earth. Does that make sense? But because Abraham was obedient and willing to do that, Yahweh said, because you didn't withhold your only begotten son, now I won't withhold my only begotten son. And because of that, your seed is going to be multiplied. Or did it say that? Let's look at it. Abraham is told in multiplying, that word is rabah, his zerah would be multiplied, rabah. Now, the word for rabah means to multiply, but it also means to make something enlarged, to enlarge it specifically. And then it says, your seed, in multiplying, I will multiply you, and your seed would become like the stars of heaven. If you look at the Hebrew language, it would actually say your seed would become as or for. Did you hear that? As or for. It's a conjunction. It can mean like them or for them. How would his seed do something beneficial to the heavens? Or how could the heavens do something of benefit, something for the seed of Abraham? In the Hebrew language, it says Aleph Tav Zerah, Zerachah. The Aleph Tav is now taking this out of into an entirely different dimension. Not only we've been talking about Abraham's seed, but now we're talking about the seed of Yahweh, the Aleph Tav and his seed. Are you hearing this? And it's saying that the Aleph Tav Zerachah would be multiplied for the stars. That word stars there, everybody thinks of it as that blinking light in the heavens, and it is kokav, but it also hints at a window, an opening, and a aperture, a doorway, a portal. Is that getting into our head? Because of Abraham's covenant demonstration of obedience, by offering his only begotten son, his seed would multiply naturally. His seed would be the fruit above, but there would also have to be a root beneath. Same principle that the enemy works through. And the root beneath would be from the stock of Yahweh. Are you seeing this? And his seed would multiply. The fruit above the ground would multiply, and in multiplying, it would enlarge an opening. It would enlarge a portal or doorway to allow the Aleph Tav to access a specific portal, opening, window, aperture. In order for the Aleph Tav to become the possessor of his gates. It's one thing for Abraham and his seed to possess his gates, but Abraham and his seed could not do for mankind what Yeshua could do, the Aleph Tav Zerachah, in possessing his gate. So we need to understand these gateways. There's dimensions here that if you don't see it, you're going to miss it. So what gateway is the enemy's possessing in your life? What gateways are you called yourself to possess? What gateway is Yeshua called to possess? He's going to possess the gate of his enemies. Well, I'm here to tell you from Genesis chapter 3 forward. Everybody look at me. The principal gateway in the earth that the enemy controlled was this gateway. He controlled the gateway of the Adam. He operates through the Adam. And because of that, the gateway of the flesh, listen to me now, Shepherd John talked about it just last week, I believe. I think it's the 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Was it verse 50? Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. If you go back and look at it, you understand this principle now. Unless Yeshua comes back and possesses this gateway became the portal for death, sin, sickness, and disease to operate throughout the generations of all mankind. This was the original Edenic gateway. Are you listening to me? And even though each individual man has control over their specific gateway, remember, the enemy cannot control me unless I gave him specific permission, or by acquiescence I gave him permission, or by it being grandfathered down to me and I'm ignorant of it. But once I understand that the gateway's been opened, I have to do something about it. And so the enemy cannot usurp this gateway unless I give him control. Are you listening to me? But because of what happened with Adam, go back and read Romans. It says, because of one man's sin, death entered into the world. How did death enter the world? It entered through the flesh of the Adam. And so from that time forward, all of the seed of the Adam had death working in us, and we have been the portal, the gateway that the enemy operated in, and Yeshua had to come and take control of this gateway. He had to come in the flesh of a man in order to become the possessor of the gateway of the Adam. Rabbah, to multiply, has a numeric value of 206. It's just so happened that it's the same numeric value of the word dabar, the word. How many of you remember Jacob's ladder? And Jacob literally sees the portal. I believe with everything in me, what Jacob saw, he's laying on the earth an Adama altar. And what he sees is a ladder, a DNA helix, and it's extended into the heavens. And he sees the angels of Elohim ascending and descending. And Yeshua in John 1:51 says, you will see the angels of Yahweh ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So he identifies himself as that ladder or the gateway. And I'm convinced that what Jacob saw was that ladder, a great portal opened up into the heavens, and it descended like a cone into his own body. And I believe that what Jacob saw was the Messiah himself taking on the vessel of a fleshly man. And the fleshly man, with the word of Yahweh resonating inside him, became a gateway into the heavens, where all of creation's power that set everything into motion would operate through an individual who became that vessel or that doorway. And it was a prophetic picture of our Messiah, Yeshua. This can't be overlooked, because from creation forward, Elohim's plan determined that his only begotten Son would become the Redeemer of mankind. Why? Because Adam was the original ladder to the heaven. Adam was the original gateway between heaven and earth. And because of that, the enemy is not stupid. Because of that, the enemy sought to subvert the plan of Yahweh to use man as the go-between or the access way in the heavens. He saw what was done in Adam. At the time that Adam's created, the enemy, Hasatan, Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, was already a fallen being. At one time, he was not a fallen being, and he was an access way. He was a portal into the earth. Are you hearing me? And so the enemy realized, since he no longer had the opportunity to be the gateway between the heavens and the earth, that if that man was the gateway, then somehow I need to subvert the plan of Yahweh so that I can use that man, the very vessel that Yahweh chose. I need to learn how to subvert that plan so that I can now use him to accomplish the plans, my plans in the earth that I've been cut off from. Does that make sense to you? And so he could not force the Adam into relinquishing his place in the earth. And so he had to subtly subvert the plan of Yahweh, beginning by seducing Adam and Eve there in Genesis chapter 3. And as soon as Adam and Eve acquiesce, they're seduced with these sexual perversions. And I'm convinced, listen to me, we can argue until the cows come home whether it was a physical sexual act or not. The truth remains that Prior to Genesis 3, Adam and Eve had the ability to speak seed into the earth and create with it. And I believe that Hasatan, the enemy, the Nakash, the one who was a soothsayer, he was a necromancer. He was the original destroyer, the one whose seed functions through Balak and Balaam. And the moment that he begins to release his seed and Adam and Eve swallow that, remember that word for Balaam means to swallow, to be consumed by what you swallow destruction. As soon as they swallow the seed of that lie, they have acquiesced. They give the enemy permission. Now the enemy, from that time until the coming of Yeshua, he has the legal right to operate in man in the earth. Yeshua had to break the power of sin, death, hell, disease in the earth in order to take back the vessel that Yahweh could operate in the earth. My goodness. The enemy understands a spiritual. Now, we're about to hopefully uncover some things. And, I hope that the YouTube censors are listening like they've been listening lately. Because I speak against you. And should you touch the things of Yahweh, may Yahweh's word be sent against you like an arrow slung from his bow. The enemy understands the spiritual power behind Abraham offering Isaac. And even more so, he understood, even though he didn't have a spiritual insight, he understood that there was a spiritual power and significance of Yeshua being crucified. Now let me tell you, if you go back and read it, it says that had the enemy known what was going to happen when he executed Yeshua, he would never have done it. The reason that he killed Yeshua was because he understood that at the death of the flesh, when did the first fleshly man die? Genesis chapter 3. The enemy understood that at the death of the flesh, I now have a portal that I can operate in, and I will have control. He felt like that as soon as I kill Yeshua, he's in a fleshly body. As soon as I kill him, I will now have the ultimate vehicle to operate not only in the earth, but have access into the heavens. And that's why he thought he could kill the flesh of Yeshua. But there was no seed, no DNA of Adam working in him. No sickness was in him. No sin was in him. And so he had no legal right to the portal of the flesh of our Messiah, Yeshua. But from Genesis chapter 3, the enemy has understood the power of killing the flesh. That's why human sacrifice, in particular child sacrifice, is so rampant, and they understand that it becomes a means to open spiritual gateways. Shepherd John talked about the CERN collider, and it's not an accident. Go back and read in August of 2016 when they first initiated, there was a ritual sacrifice that took place. And again, the censors will say, no, that's fake news. That's a lie. There was a ritual sacrifice at its facilities. Why? Because they understand when you shed that blood, when you kill the flesh, when you offer a sacrifice, it's going to open up a portal. And they're going to do everything they can to use this CERN collider to access some spiritual dimensions that you and I have not even had the mindset to think of. Was it truly a fake sacrifice? It's interesting because during the teaching last week, on July the 5th, 2022, they opened up that CERN collider again. Do the math. 666, 75, 20, 22, 666. And it's not an accident. If you go back and look at where that original sacrifice occurred, it was in front of a statue called Shiva or Shiva. And it's interesting because like Balak, like Balaam, like Beor, Shiva means the one who destroys, the destroyer. There's something connected in the spirit realm. There's some kind of a root beneath the earth that's connected to one whose name means destroyer. And so now as we're looking at this Torah portion, I have to ask myself, what was it about this place in Moab that Og and Sihon, because see, they were intellectual giants, not just spiritual giants, they were intellectual giants. They had spiritual insight from the fallen ones. They knew we need to control this specific piece of ground. And so they go to this place called Bashan. Well, where is Bashan, and why was it so important? If you understand, Bashan was an ancient Amorite or giant stronghold. It was located just east of the Jordan River, and it was the area where Mount Hermon sits, and Mount Hermon is where, right at the base of Mount Hermon, there's a gaping hole into the bowels of the earth, and it's where the headwaters of the Jordan River erupt from. And that particular place to this day is called either Banyas or Panyas, depending on the pronunciation of the dialect, and it's traditionally called the gates of hell. The book of Enoch and others say that Mount Hermon is the place where the fallen ones first descended into the earth. And what was their purpose of descending into the earth? They would commingle their seed with flesh. Why? Because they knew the plan of Yahweh to use a man to redeem the earth. The enemy knows the salvation plan of Yahweh. Are you listening to me? The common name of this place is called the gates of hell. And many of the people that, even to this day, understand that it was the religious center of pagan idolatry, specifically two pagan deities, one called Molech, who was the god of Moab, and Ashtaroth. In addition to these Amorite gods worshiping both Molech and Ashtaroth, so did Moab. Again, I said Moab worshiped not only Molech, but Molech was also known as Chemosh. And it's not an accident. Go back and look at the origin of Molech and Chemosh, and those two names also mean the destroyer. Are you seeing the fruit above being cut off, but the roots beneath are still there? And I asked a question in my notes: how many of these names thus far relate to being destroyed or destroyer? Shiva, Balak, Balaam, Molech. These entities chose that place as the initial bridgehead because they understood the children of Israel have come out of Egypt. They're on their way to the land of Canaan. They're going to dispossess us. And so they understood we need to establish a bridgehead, a point that we can operate from, and we're going to go to the portal that we've controlled for aeons, and that's called the gates of hell, and we're going to concert our effort here so that we can jeopardize the plan of Yahweh and the plan of Israel. That's what their plans were. And now, since Balak and Balaam realized that they couldn't do what Og and Sihon did, they're going to resort to spiritual warfare and seduce Israel to engage in sexual idolatry to the god of Moab, which was Molech and Chemosh. Doesn't that sound like the same method of operation in Genesis chapter 3? The enemy could not subjugate Adam, and he couldn't force them, but he could seduce them. And so the plans of the enemy he's not going to force the multitude, billions in the earth, to bow down and worship him in the days ahead. He is going to do it by seduction. And he is seduction. I have some things in italicized word. There's no way this could happen to the super spiritual believing community today, could it? Most Christians today have no idea that Molech and Chemosh are the principal gods in their own house, along with Ashtaroth. And nobody in the Christian church, at least very few, if they do know, then why are you still there? Very few understand that the principal way of worshiping these deities was by child sacrifice. Are you listening to me? Molech or Chemosh was a brass god that was formed in a seated position. And he would have his hands out about to embrace something, and they would bring the sacrifice. They would heat him fiery red, and they would bring the child and sit in the lap of Chemosh, also known fondly as Santa Claus. So every time an individual takes their child to Santa Claus and sits him in his lap, whether you understand it or not, you are ritually sacrificing your child. Now you know why the vast majority of children that sit in the seat of Santa Claus usually are upset, because there's something about that little baby spirit on the inside. They know that they're being offered to a pagan deity. What about Ashtaroth, the goddess known as Easter or Ishtar? Oh, I would never bow down to that, but yet I will take my gift and bring it to the phallic symbol of Molech and Chemosh that I've sacrificed my child to, and I will bow down to that phallic symbol, understanding that as I bow to it, I'm invoking this spirit into my life for the coming year, that spirit and his seed will be released into my family. Gates are being opened and we don't have a clue, and Abba's trying to get our attention so that we can close those gates. There's some things that's just recently been happening. I want to skip that and we'll go on to this. I've got just 30 minutes. I want to look at the definition of Amorite. Strong's number 567. It's translated as a sayer, much like one who is a seer. What's the difference between a sayer and a seer? A seer sees stuff and a sayer says stuff. They would make public declaration. Listen to this. Never, say that word with me, never in history has the entire world's population been more at the mercy of those who would prophesy into and over them than right now. Every form of electronic media has usurped the role of both Balak and Balaam, and has verbally inoculated billions who have been conditioned to be receptive to their transmutational gene-altering therapy. And in the process, it's opened gates, and they are presently controlling gates. It's been rather low-key as we speak, but in the last couple of years, you've been seeing such an uptick in violence and hatred that has just caught the believing community who were looking in towards the end times and understanding that hard times was coming. But you've been shocked. You've been taken aback. Some of you may have been on the receiving end of the anger and the angst and the hatred and the vitriolic words that have been spoken against people that call themselves believers. Why? Because the gateways that have been kind of subdued for the last generations or so, they are being shaken, and the enemy's motivating those that are in those gateways. He operates through the flesh. The Amorites were known for their verbal and vocal blasphemies. They were also one of the, as I said, 7 Canaanite nations slated for destruction. The word Amri or Omri has the same root letters as the Hebrew word moreh, teacher. And the word moreh takes its root from the word yerah, which is the root of the word Torah, to shoot, to teach instructions. Many leaders today in Christianity and the Messianic and Hebrew roots community are themselves seers. And they're publicly prophesying against the truth of Yahweh. Matthew 7:15 says, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." I want you to go back and read Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. That statement is made immediately after Yeshua gives us a very powerful dissertation regarding the straight gate and the wide gate. He says, don't you follow the wide gate. Why? Because the sheep that are masquerading, the false shepherds and false pastors masquerading their sheep, are leading their flock into the wide gate, the way of destruction. Hear that word, destruction? You're to not follow that way. You're to go by way of the straight gate. And we think straight as in no crookedness, but it means a confined, constricted area that few fall in. If you are one that follows the herd mentality, you have been following a false prophet. You are following Balaam. Why are these leaders so dangerous to the body of Messiah? Because they are embracing a hybrid mixture of the enemy's words. Flesh, listen to me, I defy you to to try and refute this. Flesh and Torah cannot mix. Why? Because the Torah will kill your flesh. Well, wait a second. Hold on. I thought that I was teaching the Torah and hearing the Torah and had the Torah in me. The only way that the Torah could be living inside you is because of the work of our Messiah, who took on the portals of the flesh of the Adam and has given you the opportunity to be crucified in the flesh, but nevertheless you can live. How? Because of the Spirit of Yeshua that lives in me. Now the Torah and I can coexist. The moment that I get into the flesh, that Torah begins to kill the flesh again. And the moment that I get in the flesh, guess what? I just give the enemy permission to begin to work some more in my life. Come on now. This is the truth. I was moving in his people. The root of that word moreh, that means, teacher, can also indicate fear and reverence. And because of their supernatural DNA, these hybrid monsters, Og and Sihon, who were living mutually with the Amorites, they had invoked fear among the mortals, and in the process, they were speaking. They became the gods to these people. Are you listening to me? And as their principal deities, the people listened to these idols rather than the word of Yahweh. And so, instead of hearing the word of Yahweh, these Amorite giants would speak against the word of Yahweh. They would profane his name. Go back and read Genesis 4:26 and Genesis 6:1. It talks about men profaning the name of Yahweh. And that word profane there includes sexually profaning and defiling it. Wait a second now. Let's just stop here and touch this. Can y'all abide with me for a minute? How can I profane the name of Yahweh? I don't understand. The sole purpose of having a name is to perpetuate generations. Yahweh released his name in the earth upon the Adam in order for the Adam, Genesis 1:26 through 28, to produce seed, to be fruitful and multiply and replenish, subdue, and have dominion. In order that Yahweh's name, not the Adam, but because of the obedience of the Adam, Yahweh's name would be great in the earth. That's why throughout the Torah, everything that Yahweh does is always because of his great name's sake. Why? Because his intent has been to raise up children who would embody his name. That's what my legacy should be on the earth. Are you listening to me? And so if I engage in anything that profanes its name, it means I'm cutting off my ability to produce godly seed. So now you understand why there's massaging of the genders. Now you understand why homosexuality and all this other stuff is so rampant. It's simply because it's not that and it is a bad sin. It's not that it's worse than any other. The reason it makes it an abomination is because it's coming against the name of Yahweh and profaning that name. Are you listening to me? What? Did you realize, and I know this is going to upset some of us, did you realize the reason that we were encouraged to wear all the masks throughout these last couple of years? The sole purpose of that. Because see, the way when I sit here and I converse to you or with you, or I'm conversing with Yahweh, it's called verbal intercourse. Panim al panim, face to face. And so if I can mask you where I can't see what you're saying and I can't have the relationship with you, I have just profaned the name of Yahweh. Are you listening? This is why these things were not subtle. We were told it was for our health benefit. That's hogwash. The purpose of it was to corrupt our DNA. The purpose of it was to cause these vessels to ignorantly open up these doorways a little wider. And now we have been primed for what's going to be coming in the days ahead. Oh, there's a lot. You're talking about control. There's a lot more controls that's going to be released on the populace in the days ahead. You're going to be controlled or you're going to be controlling. Are you listening? The word kalal for profane comes from a two-letter root. This blows my mind. The chet and the lamed. And the chet lamed was the job of the priests. The priests were charged with chal, being able to distinguish between that which was holy and that which was profane. Nothing profane was ever to be allowed into the sanctuary. If it was allowed in the sanctuary is defiled. And if a sanctuary is defiled, I have just profaned the name of the Creator. Are you hearing me? These Amorites, sayers, they would profane the name of Yahweh by promoting sexual perversion of a myriad sort, crossing the boundaries between those established between the angels and the men, the fruit of above and the roots beneath. The perversion of sexual deviancy with animals, invalidating the genders of male and female. And the purpose was to exterminate a seed line from Yahweh. If I can attempt to exterminate the seed line, I've profaned His name. I've said, I'm going to cut this seed line off. Why? Because His name is not worthy. And I submit to you now, if there is in fact a priesthood existing today, and I submit to you, I'm convinced that there is a Melchizedek priestly order that exists, then the ability to discern the holy from the profane should be paramount to identifying who that priestly group is. And no priest should ever embrace animal sacrifice when the blood of our Messiah has been shed. If we do, we have just brought in that which is profaned into, listen to me, how could I say that? Because that temple represented the body of man, and it was a dead and dying entity. And when Yeshua comes and resurrected that man and took the control of that gateway, that man is the only vessel, the only portal in the earth. And if I decide I'm going to go back to a fleshly, dead, dying entity, then I have profaned the name of Yahweh. You ever wondered why so much sexual perversion and all this uproar and outcry against the genders is going on? There's a simple answer. The enemy is smarter. Turn to your neighbor, the animal, and tell him, excuse me, your neighbor, the animal. Turn to, you know the word humans, you know, a monster, an animal, right? Turn to your neighbor and tell him the enemy is smarter than most believers. I'm telling you, that's just the honest truth. Can I be honest with you? It's not that we don't have the ability to have a great intellect. It's because we're too lazy, and it causes us to be responsible for what we hear. And so we would rather not hear it so that we don't have to be responsible for putting it into action. Are you listening? And so the reason this is happening is because He's preparing gates for the next awakening. In fact, all of us have been paying attention to Roe versus Wade here lately. And all of the aborted babies, it's a travesty. And I'm here to tell you, simply because of that, to this point, there's been an average of over almost 900,000 babies a year murdered through abortion, child sacrifice. Those doors were opened. Are you hearing me? Did you know that there are also over 800,000 documented by the FBI children under the ages of 12 years old that go missing on a yearly basis, an average of 16,000 per state, and they're not found? Where are those children? I'm telling you, they have become gateways. The enemy understands the power of it, and because of that, in my opinion, it's in my notes, it clearly exposes who controls the United States of America and where this nation is headed, and judgment is coming, and it cannot be stopped. If you want to avoid the judgment of the Creator, you better find the right relationship, repent, and turn from your wicked ways, and then find your Goshen as quick as you can, because the plagues are already here. Why do you think Og and Sihon wanted to control the gates of hell, this place called Bashan? How many of you remember in Matthew chapter 16, Yeshua carries his disciples to an isolated place, and He makes the statement that the gates of hell shall not prevail against you. Remember that? he actually carries them to the base of Mount Hermon. And he's speaking to them regarding this hole that's coming out of the bowels of the earth. And he's telling them something about the roots that lie beneath. Fruit above, roots beneath. Are you hearing me? Now, the gates of hell in the Greek is Pule Hades. The word Pule in the Greek does mean gates, but the word Hades or Hades is a compound with the Hebrew letter Aleph or the Greek Alpha, and it's a negative. It means no or not. Hades. Es or Edo means to see. And so the gates of hell are the gates that you're not able to see with your natural eyes. Pay attention to me, because if you could see them with your natural eyes, in the present condition that the vast majority of us are, we would turn and we would run in terror. Very few would pick up a stone and put it in a sling and run towards the giant. But Yahweh's stirring up His people, and you're going to become a militant organization. You're going to become a people of warfare, and you're not only going to know how to do spiritual warfare effectively. We've had teaching for the last couple of generations, and it's just been bits and pieces. We've seen things through a glass darkly, but Abba's revealing some things now, and you're going to be taught. You're going to become very mature in spiritual warfare, so that you can go take the gates that rightfully belong to Yahweh's people. You've got to learn how to close doors. They may seem harmless now, but a destroyer is about to be released. Balaam, Balak, Shiva, Molech, Chemosh, they all are destroyers. And one called Abaddon, Apollyon, is about to be released. And listen to me, he is going to take possession of those gateways that have been dedicated to him. The ones that he's had permission to take, he's going to take them. And even though you may not be able to see it now, you better learn to read the fine print in your covenant contract. The big print gives, the little print takes away. You better learn the contracts that you have made with the enemy. You better go back and examine every facet of your life. If you can't see the hand of Yahweh working there effectively, you need to stop and do some fasting and praying so that you can find out what the fine print's saying about where I currently am, and learn how to deal with that gateway that may have been open. Learn how to surgically excise that cancer in your life and in your house and in your family. And then you can start doing battle, spiritual warfare on behalf of your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and your family members that are not serving Yahweh. Yeshua took his disciples to this place called Banyas, the place known as the gates of hell. But before he starts speaking to them about the gates of hell, so that you can understand why he's speaking to them regarding the gates of hell, he asks a question that it's real simple. He says, "Who do men say that I am?" And the answer is, some say you're Elijah. Some say you're John the Baptist or another prophet. He says, "No, I know what I hear out there. I know what I hear out there, but who do you say I am?" He gets specific, and the reason for that is because he's going to use that to segue into why he's brought them to the gates of hell. And Peter says, this blows me away, "You are the Mashiach, the Son of the living Elohim." And then Yeshua replies, and this was so incredulous when I read this in the Greek language, it's mind-staggering. Because he acknowledged that he was the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim, he says, "You are blessed, Simon Bar-Jonah." How many of you ever did a word study on Shimon Bar-Jonah? Few of us have. We've looked at it, but not in context of what we're going to see. Because he stops right there and said, "You're Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Why? Because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And I'll say, because you can see this, remember, gates of hell, the gates that you can't see. Peter couldn't see that. Peter couldn't see those gates of hell and understand the principle behind it spiritually. Yeshua says, but because you have seen it, you're blessed. And the only way you could see it was because my Father which is in heaven has shown this to you. And then he says something astounding. He says, you are Petra, and upon this rock I will build my church. And in addition to that, the gates of hell can't prevail against it. What rock is he talking about? He's talking about the revelation that he just showed his disciples. That's what he's going to build on. Was Peter the rock? I've even taught this. What he did, he actually says, you're Peter, and you're a little fragment of rock, but upon this rock I'll build my church. And in a sense, that was true, but it's not what we understand. Y'all want to find out? I am not even halfway. And I got 9 minutes. My goodness. Have you ever asked why he calls him Shimon Bar-Jonah, Simon Bar-Jonah? Shimon comes from the word Shema, to hear. And the word Bar is the Greek equivalent to the word Bain, meaning son. So what we need to focus on is hear the son, Yonah. And immediately you think it's talking about the minor prophet, Jonah, whose name is translated in the Hebrew as meaning dove. But this comes from a specific masculine noun, Yavan, which means miry clay. And a good example of this miry clay is, you can see it again in Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where iron and clay are commingled in the last day. And the psalmist mentions it, and he says, he, talking about Yahweh, but specifically about Yeshua, and I believe that it's Yeshua prophesying this. And I believe Yeshua is saying, he brought me up also out of a horrible pit. Yeshua went down into the pit. Are you listening to me? And he brought him out of miry clay. He brought Yeshua out of the encumbrances of a frail, fleshly, clay body. And he set his feet upon a rock, and he established my goings. And so what Yeshua is saying to Peter is that Peter heard this even though he was in a miry clay, flesh and blood body. And Peter was in a vessel that, according to the psalmist, was a horrible, that word there, horrible, is Sheol, which means destruction, a ruined pit, and could only see death. And what he's saying is that he, Yeshua, would then take this Adam, this Peter, and he would set them upon a rock. What rock? Oh, the rock that he's talking about is what the psalmist was just alluding to. Yeshua would come in a fleshly body, and because he would be the one that had no sin in him, he could then redeem this fleshly body. And instead of being built on a foundation of clay, man's life and man's future would be built on a solid rock called the Zur, the rock that followed them in the wilderness. We are not going to be part of the commingled nations of iron and clay. Yeshua has redeemed us in the flesh. But listen to this. What rock was Yeshua referring to? Peter? No. Emphatically no. The context of this whole dialogue centers on that gate. The pagans felt like this was a portal, the gates of hell was a portal, and that the fallen ones had come out of there and entered into the gateways or the bodies of men, and that they were their gods. And so the pagans felt like that they were the sons of God. Molech, Chemosh, they were the sons of God, the begotten sons of God. And so he takes them to that place, and he's telling them, listen, what you don't understand is that this is a counterfeit gateway. There's only one gateway, and it's the gateway to the Adam, And he cites the origin of his own DNA as proof of his claim as the only begotten Son of Yahweh by right because of what Abraham did. Are you listening to me? And because of what Abraham did, he not only has the right as the gateway in the earth, but he has the authority that goes with this. And it's the fact that he is the only begotten Son of Yahweh. These fallen ones are not the sons of Elohim. These pagan deities are not the sons of Elohim. This gateway that's called the gates of hell, where the principal deities, the watchers, fell into the earth, they're not the begotten sons of Yahweh. There's only one, and that's me, and it's upon this rock that I'm going to build the church. The fact that I came in the flesh and subdued the flesh, that's the foundation that I'm going to build on. Now you know why Moshe got in trouble by striking the rock twice. Listen to me carefully. Moshe struck the rock the second time, and if Yeshua, listen to me, Yahweh's redemption plan for mankind had still been set in motion from Genesis chapter 3 forward. He had a son that was going to come, the only begotten son that would redeem mankind. The fallen ones entered into the earth and called themselves the sons of Elohim. And people worshiped them thinking that they were the ones that they received their existence and redemption from. Yeshua was trying to tell his disciples, no, I'm the only begotten Son of Yahweh. And so what he's doing, he's reminding them even of what Moshe did in the wilderness. When Moshe strikes the rock the second time, Moshe actually relegated Adam and all of the future Adamic generations to an eternity separated from Yahweh, because by striking the flesh, it means that no one could come in the flesh and redeem them. Yeshua came in the flesh, struck in the flesh, because there was no sin in him. Then he redeemed mankind. He redeemed the gateway. He redeemed the portal back. Does that make sense? There are many false prophets in the earth as we speak, currently engaged in striking Yeshua the second time. How? By advancing the cause of a third temple and a Levitical system of animal sacrifice. And you can rest assured, there is a king of the fallen ones, and he is going to sit on his throne in that temple. And I'm here to tell you, I believe this with everything in me. Go back and read Revelation 9, where it talks about the bowels of the earth opened, and one called Apollyon or Abaddon being released. I believe that coinciding with the public declaration, when Balaam stands up and declares that we're going to start construction of this third temple, before they ever lay a foundational stone, they're going to have to take that red heifer that's been in the news, and they're going to have to take the ashes of the red heifer and use it to cleanse the area. When that begins to happen, that's the fruit above. Underneath, there's going to be some roots that are going to come out of that pit. As soon as that happens, simultaneously with that, everybody that's agreeing with that, everybody that's waiting for that to be open, everybody that's going to embrace that, what you have just done, you have just opened up this vessel, and all of those hordes that vomit out of the bowels of hell, they're going to come and they're going to look at what's been promised to them, what has been permitted to them, and they're going to begin to take over the bodies, those vessels that have been given permission to them to do so. And they're going to begin to operate in the earth. Listen to me. And it's not the wrath of the devil. It's the wrath of Yahweh that's going to be poured out at that particular time. Now you know why 1 John 4 tells us, beloved, don't believe every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of Yahweh, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. How can I know the Spirit of Yahweh? Every spirit that confesses that Yeshua the Messiah came in the flesh is from Yahweh. How could that be pertinent to what we're talking about? He's the only entity that came in the form of this fleshly body without sin in him and redeemed this original gateway. It is now a sinless gateway, giving us access back to the Creator. You can give permission to the enemy, and he can still use this gateway. But as long as you walk in the Spirit and not according to the flesh, you are not under condemnation. Can you say amen? Listen to this. Yeshua redeemed the original gateway in the earthly realm. The Aleph Tav, the Adam, dust from the Adamah. Go back and read that. The man that was taken from the dust of the ground. How many of you ever looked at it? In the Hebrew, it's Aleph Tav Ha'adam, Afar Min Ha'adam. I'm going to share this with you. The word afar doesn't mean something you'd build and, roast hot dogs or something around. It's a Hebrew word translated as dust. And when you read it, the Strong's Concordance or any other dictionary talks about it's just dirt that's been pulverized. But what afar really is it's microscopic particles from an original material. And this Aleph Tav, the Et Ha'adam, the Aleph Tav, the man, was the afar. He was the microscopic particles of an original creation. And so Yeshua, not only was Yeshua the only begotten of Yahweh, the first begotten of Yahweh, but he paved the way by redeeming this fleshly vessel for there to be other begotten sons of Yahweh. Are you listening to me? And so what Yeshua did was redeem a way for the multitudes of the pulverized DNA of Yahweh that had been deposited in this Adam. Listen to me. I know Adam was dying, but I also understand that the DNA of Yahweh was still resonating in form in the body of Adam. That's why Yeshua came in and took that fleshly form. And so what happens is that Yeshua is here to redeem the multitudes of the DNA of Yahweh, those particles that have been disseminated and scattered in the earth. And created material cannot be shaken and destroyed because created material by Yahweh cannot be shaken or destroyed by man. It is eternal, and it can only be compromised by mixing it with the serpent seed, which will be destroyed in the coming shaking. Now you understand why Yeshua went down to Banyas and told his disciples about the gates of hell. He told them that he was going to take control of the flesh gate of Adam, and he would be the fruit above. And he would be cut off, just like it says in Amos. And in being cut off, he would go down into the pit. Looks like he's within the confines of miry clay. And going down into the pit, what he would do, he would then cut off the root of the serpent seed beneath the ground. And from that time forward, that seed has been cut off. Are you listening to me? We could go on for quite some time. What I think I'll do is stop right here and maybe do a part 2 if that's okay with you guys. Was this hard to understand? It's powerful revelation, stuff that I have not had the privilege of hearing before. And if you didn't understand it, then I apologize, because I believe that I'm responsible for making it as plain as possible. And I believe that Abba's given you ears to hear with. And I believe with all my heart that we're moving into a season now when Yahweh's trying to teach us how precious and important these gateways are. Don't listen to the enemy. Do not let him seduce you. Be careful of what you're giving your attention to. I cannot say that enough. And I've said it, and we've all said it. Shepherd Don, Brittany, we've said it from this platform on a number of times. And it just goes in one ear and out the other, because all of us have closet stuff that's precious to us. I can't tell you enough how we need to start censoring what we look at and what we're listening to, who we talk to, who we fellowship. Oh, I know that a lot of us have to be out in the world. I understand that. You are not of the world. You're in the world. You can go in the world, but you don't have to be like them. And you don't have to listen and tolerate it. You can still present the presence of Yahweh in a righteous way in your lifestyle, and you can learn how to demonstrate that first in your own home. You can't take it out there if you're not doing it in your own home. And Yahweh's admonishing us. He's challenging us. We got to rise to the occasion. Rise up, O mighty men and women of valor, and shake yourself. Shabbat shalom.